The Spartan II super soldiers are as powerful and as godlike as they are as a consequence of the invasive surgical augmentations that were performed to their bodies when they were but 14 years old. And these augmentations were specifically chosen and researched and developed to produce the ultimate soldier. In spite of how well they were researched by the greatest mind of the time, Dr. Catherine Halsey, there was still a massive failure rate. Nearly half of the Spartans that received these augmentations died as a consequence. But what if I told you that there was a plethora of other augmentations that Dr. Halsey was researching at the time that even they were much too dangerous for her to consider putting into the augmentation sets for the Spartan IIs? What if I told you that with these additional augmentations the Spartan IIs would be even more powerful than we currently observe them to be? What if I told you that Halsey refined them and that the surviving Spartan IIs now have been upgraded and augmented with them since? Let's look at the evidence that suggests that the Master Chief and his fellow surviving Spartan IIs are more powerful now than the Spartan IIs originally were ever intended to be. Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00, and today we're looking at very clear and concise evidence that was provided in the book The Shadows of Reach that suggests that the surviving Spartan IIs, mainly the prominent members of Blue Team, are now stronger than the original Spartan IIs were ever intended to be, because they have been since upgraded with additional augmentations above and beyond the original Project Aster. So briefly, let's cover the original Spartan II augmentations, Project Aster. The 5 primary augmentations are as follows. The carbide ceramic ossification made their bones nearly indestructible. The occipital capillary reversal gave them immensely increased and enhanced normal vision and an ability to see in near perpetual darkness. The superconducting fibrification of neural dendrites gave them a reaction time of 300% that of base normal for a human being. The catalytic thyroid implant made the Spartans much taller and much larger than the average human being. And the muscular enhancement injections made the Spartans' muscles much denser and more powerful than the average human. It is also widely accepted that there was a plethora of genetic enhancements and alterations that were also given to the Spartan IIs. Despite how intensively these augmentations were researched and developed, and by the greatest mind of the time, Dr. Catherine Halsey, there was still nearly a 50% failure rate for the augmentations, leading to nearly half of the candidates that underwent the augmentations to die as a consequence, rather than their bodies actually being cremated or committed to space, as we were led to believe. They were actually cryogenically preserved, and rehabilitation protocols were enacted thereafter, where further augmentations would be used to somewhat rehabilitate the failed augmentations and hopefully make more of the failures actually functional Spartans. Interestingly enough, this was the case with the Spartans of Red Team as featured in Halo Wars and Halo Wars 2. There were 4 additional augmentations that Dr. Halsey was researching at the time that exceeded the safety parameters she put in place for acceptable failure rates. The first being the adrenal thermal metabolite, which enhances the adrenal response under physiological distress. The catalysts, however, break down into highly toxic waste products, making this protocol eventually fatal. Their future research would have involved a possible coenzyme inhibitor. This was ruled out at the time of Project Aster. The second being the cyclosynthetic neurotransmission gene sequences, which showed significant evidence to support increases in intelligence and cognitive markers, although very high rates of psychotic and antisocial behaviours absolutely prohibited the use of this protocol on any Spartan II candidate. The future research there would have been gradual application over the subject's early life, mitigating the side effects. Long-term studies were quietly arranged, and notes are available from Operation Tendril. The third being the leukocytic coprotein complex and microfibrin spindlase. This one specifically helped with wound suppression, healing, and near-instant blood clotting, although 33% of the subjects incur near-fatal clotting, with future research being completely unknown. And the fourth being the neuron surface viral macrophages, which is a site injection on neural tissues which boosts selenium fiber bonding by 3 orders of magnitude, which makes cybernetic augmentation and integration possible with minimal signal-to-noise ratios. The failure rate of that augmentation is also unknown. So to summarise, the 4 additional augmentations that didn't meet the failure rate parameters that Halsey set out increased their adrenal response in times of stress, boosts their intelligence and cognitive markers, gives them better healing and wound suppression, and opens up their body to full cybernetic augmentation therapies. Now, the suggested potential of those further augmentations are immense, and could see any Spartan that received them being immeasurably more powerful than any Spartan without them. But as I said at the start of this video, the Shadows of Reach suggest that the Master Chief and perhaps the members of Blue Team have already received these augmentations. Evidence of which can be found on page 157 when the Master Chief is talking to a doctor about an injury to his thigh. He took a plasma round directly to the thigh which melted through the armour and burned a large section of his quadricep away, rendering it almost useless. Chief actually had to use Mjolnir's movement assist systems in order to take full executive control over that leg, effectively making his leg completely passive and using the armour as something more of a splint. Page 157 reads as follows. From what I heard, you were running on it while molten armour was still dripping down your leg. Affirmative, but it hurt, Chief replied. You should let me do an NPI, Somoji said, referring to a nanoparticle image used in combat hospitals to examine soft tissue damage. We should confirm that all your muscles are still properly attached. Can you do it through 5 centimeters of titanium alloy? No. Then that's a negative. Mjolnir armor isn't designed to be removed casually. Treating an injury is hardly casual. Still not going to happen, John said. How about a medical readout? Somoji rolled her eyes. Sure, I'll take what I can get. John had his onboard computer isolate the data relevant to his wound, then transfer it to the palm-sized medical pad inside her apron pocket. When the device chimed, she lifted her brow and pulled it out. She blinked at the display a few times, issuing ocular commands, then studied the screen for a few moments. It says you were wounded a day ago. Is that right? The precise date and time of the injury appeared on John's HUD. Just over, ma'am. Her eyebrows rose. Then you have remarkable healing powers. She slipped the medical pad back into her apron pocket. It appears a large chunk of your quadriceps was burned away when the plasma bolt impacted, but your functionality records and metabolic panels are already at the levels I'd expect to see after 10 days of bed rest. Is that due to your augmentations? I couldn't say, John replied, suddenly adding, because it's still classified. For much of its existence, the Spartan II program had been a secret so tightly held that even most UNSC personnel weren't aware of its existence. So let's just put this into context. The Master Chief was hit in the thigh with a plasma bolt that melted away 2 inches of titanium armour, and while the armour was still molten and physically dripping down his leg, it burnt a huge section of his quadricep clean off. He continued to function and perform well with this injury, despite the fact that if such an injury was endured by a normal human being, they'd be practically incapable of moving. And after just over a day since the injury was inflicted, John's equivalent level of healing matched that of somebody who had been in 10 days full bed rest. That is remarkably in line with the third of the 4 augmentations that Dr. Halsey deemed too risky to perform on Project Asta the first time around. And while this is one of the few situations in which we actually have some degree of evidence to support the idea that the Spartan IIs received these newer augmentations perhaps after research had been done and the mortality rate had been significantly reduced, the 4th augmentation, which is the one that leads to the ability to implant cybernetic augmentations and have them take to the neural system almost perfectly, falls in line with many of the augmentations that we see the Spartan IVs received, including a plethora of artificial organs, and bioreactors. Now, many of the Spartan III augmentations being almost wholly chemical based were innovations on the Spartan II augmentations and gave very similar results, but at a massively increased mortality rate, being near 100% survival. Though it wouldn't make a lot of sense to give the Spartan IIs the Spartan III augmentations, as effectively the Spartan III augmentations was simply made to mimic that of the Spartan II augmentations at a reduced cost and reduced mortality rate. You'd effectively be giving the Spartan II the same augmentation set twice. However, these 4 augmentations that were initially ruled out of Project Aster could potentially have now reached a point where they could be retroactively applied to the Spartan IIs to give them a bit more of an edge. And indeed, many of the augmentations we see in the Spartan IVs are unlike many of the augmentations we see on the Spartan IIs, so it could even be that while these new augmentations were being applied to the still operational Spartan IIs, they could also have received some of the Spartan IV augmentations as well. Obviously, at this stage, other than the insert in Shadows of Reach, there's precious little information as to whether or not the Spartan IIs have received further augmentations, but it stands to reason the Spartan II still surviving and operationally effective, including the Master Chief, would be at the top of the list for any retroactive augmentations that could be applied and allow the Spartan IIs to become even more powerful, as although the Spartan IIs are widely considered the strongest of all of the Spartans, they can still be killed, and due to the near mythical status that the Master Chief has attained during his service and the unquestionable morale boost that he gives to all of the troops under his command when he's seen on the battlefield, the UNSC need to ensure that the Chief survives as long as humanly possible, especially when we're facing a threat as significant as the Banished, and so soon after the Human Covenant War. The Spartan IIs are immensely powerful, but they are not invincible, contrary to the popular opinions of many among the UNSC. And with the likes of Atriox, Escharum, the Harbinger, and whomever else may be posing a threat to humanity in the near future, Chief needs every single tactical advantage that he can get his hands on, and if that means giving the Spartan IIs additional augmentations to help them perform even better, you can bet that the Office of Naval Intelligence and the UNSC would jump at the opportunity. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think that the Spartan IIs have actually received further augmentations post Project Aster? Could they have received some of the Spartan IV augmentations, and does that passage in the Shadows of Reach point towards the possibility that they've received at least some, if not all, of the original 4 augmentations that were ruled out by Dr. Halsey due to them being too risky? Comment down below and let's get a discussion going. And in the meantime, thanks for watching. Stick your comments down below, I look forward to what you have to say. I want to give a quick shout out to my patrons and YouTube members Neek the Sonic Cartographer, Siphonic Storm and Todd Morrison, my Tier 0 Transcendients, Brian, Sebastian, Darian, Red Sea, Stalk of the Realms, Falcon X003, Starlight, Alvin, Flaming Halo, Josh, Legions Lost, Kyle, Cat Erdicam, Schneidish, Leon, Ignizzle, Chris, Cooper, Prophet, and Devon, the holders of the mantle, my glorious reclaimers, my loyal Metarchs, and all the other patrons and YouTube members that have jumped aboard to support the channel. Much love to you guys, thanks so much for your support. It's keeping things happening and helping development of the channel and future awesomeness in a big way. If you like Halo lore discussed to insane levels of detail, hit that subscribe button and the little bell icon so you're told the second a new video hits the shelves. Be sure to support us on all major social media channels, including Discord, and if you really love the channel, consider heading over to Patreon and supporting the channel over there, or jumping on as a channel member. It means the world to me and affords you loads of great perks and bonuses, while also helping work towards some awesome stuff in the near and distant future. Take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.